haven't already, if you could turn off or mute your phones, that would be great. Welcome to the Juliet Gordon-Low birthplace. I kind of feel funny saying that because I'm about to introduce the director of the birthplace, so I'm welcoming you to her home. But we're really excited to be here for December's Hungry for History program. I'm LaShawn Spraker with the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives, and many of you may know that our own spaces at City Hall are under construction right now, or restoration, which we're really excited about. And so we've relied on a couple of very good colleagues and friends in our cultural community, like the birthplace, to host us for some of our programs. Before I introduce today's program and speaker, I want to put a bug in your ear for our programs in January that are coming up. On January 17th, we're going to partner with the Davenport House Museum for a program featuring Alexandra Chan, and she's going to be discussing her memoir, In the Garden Behind the Moon, which explores her family's history and journey from China to Savannah. That program will be at the Kennedy Pharmacy behind the Davenport House Museum. On January 29th, we're going to actually have a second Hungry for History of the Month, and we're going to host archaeologist Laura Seifer, and she's going to discuss the archaeological excavations on Skidaway Island, the subject of her new book, Faith and Education at the Skidaway Island Benedictine Mission. I think that's going to be very interesting. We're going to hold that one at the Adams Administrative Building. I'm going to send out more information about both of those programs via our listserv. If you're not on our listserv and you want to be, just see me before you leave at the end of the program and get me your email address. So turning to today, I'm really excited about today's program. We're featuring Juliet Gordon-Low Birthplace's own Executive Director, Shannon Browning-Mullis, thank you. And she's going to be speaking on Savannah women in the Progressive Era. Shannon is a Girl Scout alum and former troop leader, and she joined the Birthplace staff in 2020. And when I wrote that, gosh, time really flies. So, but as head of the Cultural Assets Department for Girl Scouts USA, Shannon's the keeper of Girl Scout history. Along with her team that's based both here in Georgia and in New York, she oversees the operations and interpretation of the Juliet Gordon-Low Birthplace, the GSUSA Collection and Archive, and the GSUSA Archive Research Center in Briarcliff Manor, New York. Prior to joining Girl Scouts USA, she served as a curator of history and decorative arts at Telfair Museums. Shannon has a master's in history from Georgia Southern University. So I'll now turn our podium over to Shannon.
It's funny that you said you're at my house, because I say that all the time when like my husband or my daughter are picking me up. I'm like, I'm at my house, and they're like, you know, that's not your house. You say that, but well, thank you for coming. The mic works. Say yes, Jessica. And thank you, Luciana, for featuring us. We are very excited that you're here. And for this hour, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the Progressive Era, and this is going to be Progressive Era 101, a little bit about what our current research is, and then a little bit about what we're thinking about the way we talk about history here at the Birthplace now, and the way we would like to talk about it in the future. So we're making a shift here at the Birthplace. When I came here in 2020, which was a solid 5 minutes ago, we were interpreting the house to 1886. 1886 is the year that Juliet Gordon-Low married Willie Low. Does anybody know anything about their relationship?
It wasn't good.
It was not good. It was not great. And it was also really not a defining aspect of her life. She married him when she was in her 20s. Their life together was not really what she expected or what she had been raised to expect, and he turned out not to be all that nice a guy. But by the time she was 51 in 1912, she was a very different person. She was an independent woman. She was independently wealthy. She absolutely knew what she wanted to do. She had traveled all over the world, and she had explored a lot of different things, including many art forms, which we're not going to get into today, but she was her own woman who was thinking about what she wanted for women and girls. And so rather than tell the story of this woman in 1886, we want to tell the story of this woman in 1912. So we're starting to shift the way we talk about things here and the way the house looks a good bit. The nice thing about this house is that it stayed in the same family for several generations. And of course, in 1911, they didn't come in and say, let's throw out all of grandma's furniture and buy brand new stuff. And so we don't have to do that to transition from 1886 to 1912 either. We just really have to look at things like textiles and the placement and density of decorative objects. The fact that by 1912, they really love plants in the house, which is a kind of fun thing to interpret and not something you really see earlier than that. So we're starting to think about some of those shifts as we think about how we tell this story. But what is the Progressive Era? Why are we talking about the Progressive Era? So we're thinking about Juliette Gordon-Low and how she, like all of us, did not exist in a vacuum. So what is she reading about in the newspaper? What are she and her friends talking about? What are the causes that they care about? And if you know much about the Progressive Era, you know that this is a time when people really start to be active for the things they care about. In our country, it's about 1890 to 1920. It's a time that people start to fight for things in society, for people they consider as having less power and opportunity than themselves. A lot of people really working toward making a better life for immigrants as well. And you certainly see a lot of academics, you see a lot of journalists in this movement, but you also see a lot of regular, ordinary people, and increasingly a lot of women. Women especially are starting to fight for the things they believe in, and unsurprisingly, they use a lot of clubs to do it, a lot of organizations, which we'll look at a little bit more. So you're getting people who are from the lower middle and upper classes that are part of all these movements. I don't expect you to be able to read all this, but I wanted to give you a little snapshot of we're talking about the Progressive Era, what's happening in the country, and we're talking about the founding of Girl Scouts, and how are those things connected? What do they have to do with each other? So in 1886, the American Federation of Labor is established. That's the same year she marries Willie Lowe, which you saw in that picture. The Hull House opens in 1889. You get the Sherman Antitrust Act. Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. Black men are disenfranchised in the South around this time. W.E.B. Du Bois is publishing The Souls of Black Folk. Here, Juliette and Willie split. We're starting to think about busting trusts and the power of major corporations, child labor. And then you have Willie Lowe dying here. The Jungle is published by Upton Sinclair. Taft is elected. Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, which most of you probably have heard of. And then Juliette meets Robert Baden-Powell. Are y'all familiar with Robert Baden-Powell? Who founded Boy Scouts in the UK. So it was where she learned about Girl Guides and the idea of Girl Scouting. So she founds Girl Scouts in 1912 with the first 18 girls. And that is, all of these things happen really quickly in succession. So Roosevelt runs, and we're going to talk a little bit more of that, and splits the party. You get income tax passed in 1913, then Girl Scouts headquarters moves to DC, the Federal Reserve is created. Then by that time, 2 years, there are 1,000 Girl Scout members. Without the internet, without social media, without cell phones, she manages to get 1,000 girls recruited. 1914, World War I begins and the Federal Trade Commission Act, and then by 1915, there are 5,000 Girl Scouts. Headquarters moves to New York. There are 7,000 girls. We enter World War I. Then you get the flu pandemic and the armistice. And by 1918, there are 10,000 Girl Scouts. Prohibition, the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I. By 1920, there are Girl Scouts in every state in the United States. So there are 90,000 Girl Scouts in the country by the time women have the right to vote. There's not going to be a test over that whole whirlwind, but just to say that all of the Progressive Era gains that we think about, Girl Scouts is forming and growing within that atmosphere. So, quick run through of who our Progressive Era presidents were and what they were doing. We all know this guy, right? This was my Halloween costume this year. I do not have a slide of that. So Theodore Roosevelt was the guy that said he wanted a square deal for all American men. He meant all white American men. He's known for trust busting, although he did not do as much of that as the guy who came after him. We know him more for conservation, certainly of our natural resources, consumer protection as well. He became president after McKinley was assassinated, and then he was elected to an additional term after that. And then instead of running for a third term, he supported his Secretary of War, William Taft, to take his place. Taft visited the Gordons here in Savannah in this house in 1909 and 1912. And we are very lucky that he did that because Nellie, who was Juliette Gordon-Lew's mother, was obsessed with making a really good impression, and they wrote letters obsessively. And so she describes the color of the flowers in every room of the house was there, exactly what she was serving at every meal. So we get quite a lot of information from the fact that the president came to visit the Gordons. He supported the 16th and 17th Amendments, but they were not actually signed until Wilson was president, and so he gets a little more of the credit for that. Taft opposed women's suffrage because he thought women were too emotional to be able to make major decisions. You can see that Girl Scouts was formed and active by the time he was president. That is a picture of his wife visiting the Little House, which was sort of a model house in DC where Girl Scouts would go and practice domestic arts. So Taft turned out not to be as progressive as Roosevelt thought he should be, and so he decided that he would come back and run himself. Taft did not like that and did not drop out, so they split the ticket, and Wilson won instead. Wilson was an anti-monopoly, pro-labor guy. He did not support a constitutional amendment for suffrage, but supported state-determined voting for women. So, as predicted from a Southerner, he was a states' rights guy. None of the progressive era presidents were supporting civil rights for people of color. So, a quick tour of some of the better known causes that we think about being associated with the progressive era. We all know Prohibition, right? Have you been to the Prohibition Museum? It's fun, and they give you a cocktail at it. Suffrage. We all know about suffrage. Before the Civil War, I think it's really important for us to talk about the nuance around suffrage. So before the Civil War, suffrage and abolition were deeply entwined movements. Most people who were fighting for those causes were fighting for both of them and often spoke together at the same events. After the Civil War, the 15th Amendment gave black men the vote but excluded women. We all know that the fact that that amendment gave people the right to vote did not mean people did not attempt to keep them from voting. So it's not the same as them being able to vote necessarily in practice. But the 15th Amendment did not include women. So unfortunately, what we see is a lot of white suffragists who turn on the people who had been their allies and support white supremacy as a tool instead, because they either imply or say explicitly that there are more white women than black men. And so if you give white women the right to vote, then you can keep white supremacy, which is the least attractive part of the suffrage movement, which we generally can be proud of. Anti-lynching is a major cause, and you see Ida B. Wells here. She was the most famous anti-lynching advocate. She was a journalist. I'm very excited to be able to report that Juliette Gordon-Low is going to be honored in 2025 in the American Women's Quarter program. So there will be a quarter with Juliette Gordon-Low's face on it. And Ida B. Wells is one of the other 5 women who are being honored in 2025. So I think we are in very good company. Labor reform, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire. That was a factory that employed mostly young women, and they locked the windows and doors to keep them from taking unauthorized breaks. And when a fire broke out, almost all of the young women died in that, and it was a real impetus for people who had already probably cared about labor causes to really start to work toward making true reform in that area. We see some reform of the penal and convict leasing system. Certainly, convict leasing did not go away, it did not become a beautiful, happy thing, but there was some reform in this area. Particularly one thing that we saw was an advocacy for women to be guarded by women to cut down on some of that abuse. But one of the areas that we got the most gain was education. And that is one of the things that we're really thinking about here, because of course Girl Scouts really overlaps with education reform. So some of the things that were accomplished during the progressive era in the area of education were school buildings actually being constructed. Education spending in the United States doubled during this era, and compulsory attendance laws went into effect. So before this era, you didn't have to send your kid to school, not send to school, right? There are also some things that were considered progressive causes during this period that we would not consider progressive causes today. Jim Crow segregation was considered a progressive cause in the South, not outside the South. And also things like the ideas around eugenics and things like that start to pop up in this era. So, Girl Scouts is a progressive era movement. This is something that we're playing with, something that I'm thinking a lot about, and something that we're doing a lot more research on. Stacy Cordery is Juliette Gordon-Lowe's biographer, and she says Daisy, which was Juliette's nickname, was in the progressive era reform movement, but not of it. I find that really interesting, and it's really nuanced. But she argues that Juliette built Girl Scouts from a network of her family and close friends. And she thinks that because she didn't really travel in the same circles as a lot of the women who were activists, particularly in the Northeast, which of course is where a lot of people were, the fact that Willie, her husband, did not like reform-minded women, and is quoted as saying such, and her identification as a Southerner, she says, makes it less likely that she was really a progressive era activist. And I hear her on that, but argue that, again, ideas don't exist in a vacuum. She was well educated, she was a reader, she had well educated friends who were readers, they're all having conversations. And so this is an area that we're digging more into to, you know, what were her opinions on all these other movements? Was she staying informed on all these things? So more to come on that. So I want to run through, just because I love Stacy Cordery, by the way. She is a delightful human. But because she said that because Juliette was a Southerner and there weren't that many activist Southerners that she probably wasn't, I'm going to talk about some activist Southerners. So, Mary Latimer McClendon is from Georgia. She fought for suffrage and prohibition in Georgia. She was the longtime president of the Georgia Women's Suffrage Association. She believed women would use their votes to pass comprehensive reform programs, including abolishing child labor, raising the consent age for girls from 10 to 14, instituting compulsory school attendance and hiring female guards for the state's female prisoners. Nellie Peters Black was an Atlanta native, and she was very active in Atlanta and was very much a club woman, as we talked about, the idea of organizing around clubs. And so I would like to share with you a list of the clubs she was part of. Every Saturday Club, the Pioneer Club of Atlanta, the Colonial Dames, the Daughters of the American Revolution, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Women's Auxiliaries of the Episcopal Diocese of Georgia and Atlanta, the Atlanta Women's Club, the Atlanta Federation of Women's Clubs, the Georgia Federation of Women's Clubs, the Founding Board of the King's Daughters Hospital, the Atlanta Free Kindergarten Association, the Conference of Southern Women, the School Garden Army of Georgia, Georgia Division of Women's Council of National Defense, the Executive Committee of the Women's Building at the 1895 Cotton States and International Exchange Exhibition. She held leadership positions in many of those, and she was a proponent of free kindergartens and hospitals, compulsory education, diversified farming, the enforcement of child labor laws, as well as the admission of women into the University of Georgia and the Georgia Bar. So I'm not sure how she spent her spare time. But this is very much how particularly wealthy white women were organizing their work with these clubs and organizations, which I think is kind of brilliant because it's something that we've been thinking about a lot here. How do you use social norms to disrupt social norms? norms. So this is an aside that's not in this talk. But Juliette Gordon Low used tea parties to convince wealthy Southern women that they should let their daughters be part of a club that made you leaders who love the outdoors. Like, why would wealthy women need to do that, right? But she used tea parties to convince them to do something that was not normal for their social class. And I think women broadly are doing that in this period. They're using these clubs that have been social institutions for so long to make change that's actually well beyond what their spheres normally are. And I think that's something that we need to dig into more. W.E.B. Du Bois, we know well, was not always in Georgia, but while he was at Atlanta University, which later became Clark Atlanta University, from 1897 to 1910, he carried out a series of nationally significant conferences and studies on the conditions of people of color since Reconstruction. He investigated Black landholders in Georgia, patterns of crime and incarceration, and the convict lease system. While he was in Georgia, he founded the Niagara Movement, an association of Black intellectual activists, and in 1910 founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, which in and of itself is one of the most significant things to happen in the Progressive era. So clearly there were activists in the South, there were activists in Georgia, and they were particularly activists in education. And I forgot that Luciano records all these, and so I just brazenly stole this image. You can see that, so I'm sorry. But this is Savannah in 1891, which is the year that a woman named Lynn Hartridge started a school here in Savannah. So after Reconstruction, wealthy Savannahans supported the idea of public schools for poor children, and they were happy to submit their tax dollars to make that happen. But they didn't send their own children to those schools. They had a very long-standing tradition of first having their children have private tutors, then sending them to boarding schools, and finally for the girls to finish in school. So 1891, Savannah native, member of a prominent family, Lynn Hartridge returned from Vassar, where she had received her education, and announced that she was opening a school with an aggressive college preparatory curriculum. Her students, she actually got a number of wealthy female students to enroll, and then when they became the age they would normally go to boarding schools, they left and went to boarding schools. You know what she did? She moved to New Jersey and opened a boarding school and ended up with the same students she had in Savannah. They got to leave Savannah to go to boarding school. So when she left Savannah in 1902, her school was purchased by a woman named Marion Haskell. She quickly enrolled 150 boys and girls in the school, and she hired a woman named Nina Pape to be the co-director of the school. So the kindergarten movement was much more successful in Savannah than these movements for older children. The Savannah Kindergarten Club was founded by 20 women in 1904. The idea was emphasizing creative play, love, and appreciation of children as individuals, which we're all like, well, yeah, that's what you do with little kids, right? That was not the model of education at the time. So this handsome beast is named Friedrich Froebel, and he is known as founding the idea of kindergarten. So early 19th century, he's German. He is playing with these ideas. His writing is very abstract and intellectual, but what he's looking at is this idea of developing children in a way that's not rote memorization, in a way that is about who they are as people, who we want them to become as people, and very much using a spiritual as well as intellectual model. So he says that time should be focused on play, time in nature, gardening, caring for animals, singing, all things you do in Girl Scouts. And he starts training teachers as well in Germany. And so these ideas of kindergarten spread throughout Europe and to the United States. And I should mention that kindergarten is not a one-year program for 5-year-olds. At this time, it is just young child education. So the children of a woman named Kate Baldwin found the Baldwin Association for Kindergarten in Savannah. And that's kind of the first, organization of that type here. And if you're familiar with the Kate Baldwin Kindergarten building, y'all know that building? It's a really cool building. It is on,
Houston,
there you go.
Houston at Green Square.
Where is it?
It's on Green Square. So it is a really fantastic building. It's one of the first kindergarten buildings, and the very nice folks who own it now do a lot of different things, but one of the things they are doing is digging into this history, and so you can go there and learn more about the kindergarten movement, and you can play with the toys they played with in early kindergartens, and it's really fun. So, Savannah kindergarten, this woman, Hortense Orcutt. It's a fantastic name, right? She was a leading force in the kindergarten movement in New York before she relocated to Savannah. She is advocating for clubs based on games, storytelling, folk dancing, crafts, and parties. And she thought these clubs should have a self-governing component to teach children about democracy. So she came to Savannah and became the head of the Baldwin Association that we just talked about in 1908. I really like that she specifically talks about the self-governing piece, because that also is a very big part of early Girl Scouting, was that the girls were the leaders, and when people would ask Juliet what they should do about something, she'd say, you should ask the girls, which I really like, and I would like us to move back to a little bit, because if you're ever around teenage girls, they're really snarky. I have one, but once you get through that, they're also brilliant and interesting and kind of more fair and equitable than we are, and I'm constantly stressed about the future like everybody else, but also every time I hang out with them, really hopeful about it. So I want us to get back to Ask the Girls and self-governing. So Nina Pape, remember her, she's Mary Haskell's co-director. She previously, before she worked with Mary Haskell, taught at Massey, and Massey was still very much what we thought of as education at the time, which was you sit at the desk, you look straight ahead, you memorize the same things, you say the same things. And she went in there and was like, hey, we could do like small group activities. And they were like, that is insanity, ma'am. And so she left because she was way too progressive and ended up working with Mary Haskell. She was a participant in the kindergarten movement and was active in the Progressive Education Association. Her long career in education spanned 49 years from 1895 to 1944. She was co-director with Mary Haskell for 3 years, and then Haskell got married and Pape took the school over. She renamed it the Pape School and used many of the ideas familiar to Girl Scouts. She wrote that the school, even then, was a progressive school, educating the entire child, training the eye through art, the ear through music, the head through sewing and manual labor, the body through physical exercise and grammar, the spirit through service to others. So the students participated in bodybuilding, marching drills, folk dances, waltzing, basketball, and nature walks at the Pape School. And the Pape School became the meeting place for the Savannah Kindergarten Association. So how many people are like Girl Scout enthusiasts? All the people who work here, fantastic. So many of you may not know that in 1912, Juliet Gordon Lowe was here at this house, which was her parents' house at the time, and she made a telephone call, and she said, come right over, I've got something for the girls of Savannah and all of America and all the world, and we're gonna start it tonight. We don't know how they know she said that, so I'm guessing we might have ad-libbed a little bit, but she made that call to Nina Pape. And so it was Nina Pape that came over and talked to Juliet Gordon Lowe and sort of came up with this first scheme of what Girl Scouts was going to be. I love this story because Juliet Gordon Lowe was not always amazing, but she had enthusiasm and she had creativity and she had big ideas. My guess is that Nina Pape, who ran a school, actually got stuff done. And I think you couldn't have had Girl Scouts without both of them. One of them had to dream big and one of them had to make it happen. And so I really love that. So the first kids, the first girls are coming from the Pape School, And we did not have troops of Girl Scouts, we had patrols, which is also what Girl Guides were called in the UK. Within a year, girls here said, we don't want to be guides, we want to be scouts. We want to have troops, just like the boys. And so they did. The founding Council of Advisors for Girl Scouts was firmly rooted in the kindergarten movement. It included 2 of Juliet's family members, the wife of the Episcopal bishop, and 4 members of the Savannah Kindergarten Club. Nina Pate, Hortense Orcutt, Jane Judge, who was a reporter for the Savannah Morning News, and Mrs. George W. Baldwin. I'm almost positive I know her first name, but I have to confirm it. I hate calling her Mrs. George. But she was the wife of the founder of the Free Kindergarten Association. So they're all very much, kind of circling around these same ideas. So Juliet Gordon-Low gets all the glory for founding Girl Scouts. She couldn't have founded Girl Scouts by herself. In addition to Nina Pate, those early women were very much all needed and necessary to develop the program, to spread the word of the program. We just looked at that timeline, how quickly the movement spread across the country. One person can't do that in the absence of the communication tools we have today. And I also think it speaks to how women function. Women tend, broadly, to function through relationships and connections and community building. And I love this idea of a small group of women in Savannah who then broaden that community with the people they know and the people they know. And I very much think that that's how Girl Scouts came to be. And I think that's how we kind of accomplish anything in life that we really meaningfully need to. So Pate and Orcutt very likely are the reason that we have Girl Scouts today. After coming in loud and proud, Juliet founded the Girl Scout movement in March. There are 2 troops. She recruits 5 more by May. Everything is amazing in the spring. But then most wealthy Savannians at that time left town in the summer. They didn't have air conditioning, so they didn't stay here. And so many of them were troop leaders. And so they left town. Juliet Gordon-Low's father died in August, and she retreated from the world at her Scottish estate. And by October, the remaining troops had no uniforms, they had no badges, and they were all sharing one English handbook. Edith Johnson was the organization's secretary. She called Nina Pate and Hortense Orcutt and said, we have to do something or this is not gonna happen. And so they all got together, and by July of 1913, there were 12 troops with over 150 Girl Scouts, and they had everything they needed. So while Juliet Gordon was amazing and we're in her house and I think she's great, we really want to start to think about, well, yeah, but what else? How is this whole network of women working together, and why were they all really critical to making it happen? So one aspect of the movement differed from the UK Boy Scouts, and I think this is really interesting. Robert Baden-Powell focused the camping activities in Boy Scouts on military skills. The handbook for Boy Scouts in the UK was how you can support the empire, how we build the empire, something very much about the empire. When they translated that book into the first Girl Scout manual, they rearranged all the outdoor activities to instead be about a love and exploration of nature. So all of the camping is focused on that instead of focused on military skills. And we think that Hortense Orcutt, Jane Judge, and possibly a few of those other women are the ones who really did the work of turning that 472-page English handbook about building an empire into the 144-page first Girl Scout handbook with the skills and badges for early Girl Scouts. But it is a man named Walter Hoxie who gets all the credit for it and whose name is on it. So more to come there too. So what does that look like for us? I told you that we're making a subtle shift to 1912. We are starting to focus more on women's history and progressive era movements. So Girl Scout history is really interesting, and we're going to keep talking about it. But if you weren't a Girl Scout, or if you've heard the story before, what else is interesting? We think in Savannah, we don't hear enough about either of those two things. Women's history is part of a lot of things, but not primarily focused on in a lot of places. And you don't hear that much about the Progressive Era. You really hear in Savannah, Oglethorpe came, we built some really nice houses in the 1820s, the Civil War happened, and here we are today. I would argue that there are a few other things going on. And the Progressive Era is one of those really interesting times that we're not fully exploring, particularly in museums. Candidly, one of the things we're struggling with at the moment is how to message that, because Progressive Era history is not something a lot of Americans know that much about. And so we did a little bit of testing with tourists on the street, and they were like, progressive, that means you're woke. And we're like, that's a literal era in American history, guys. So we're thinking a little bit about how we message to people that we are talking about a particular period of time when interesting things happen. So you're gonna start to see more of that programming come out of the birthplace, and I'm very glad we have a group of locals here today. So I can say this to you, and so you can start to think about if that's something you're interested in, possibly coming and being a part of it. But as we think about the changes we make here at the house, we have some really fantastic evidence to help us do it. We have the letters that I told you about, especially when Taft came to town, but all the time, Juliet and Nellie are writing back and forth to each other, very much thinking about their taste and what they're purchasing for their homes and all those things, which is very helpful. We have archival documents, as you would expect. We have artifacts, which belong to the family, and you can see throughout the house. But one really nice thing about the Progressive Era is we also have photos, which you don't get for a lot of periods before that. So this is the birthplace. Collins Quarter is right here. These trees are either huge or gone by now. So you can see that it's a little bit different than what we have now. That's the birthplace. There's Collins Quarter. And I really love this picture because this is the one that you can't really tell, but like this is a car. Are those that's a car too. Is that the horse? Go out there, we have it printed really big, but you can see that there are cars and horses, which I think is really speaking to what is happening in this period. There's so many shifts happening so quickly, and technology and transportation and communication are all changing. And when you look at the photographs from the period, you can watch that happen. The ones of Broughton Street are some of my favorite because, of course, it's the commercial area, and so things are changing very quickly. We are very fortunate that we also have pictures of the inside of the house. So we have been able to put furniture back in the exact same spot the family had the furniture. We have some of the paintings that we're able to literally hang the paintings where the paintings were. So we are really looking at as accurate an interpretation of that period as we can get. And we've made some changes in 2 of our rooms, and we are gradually continuing around the site. So you have heard our research in progress. We're still learning a lot more and starting to make a lot more changes, but I hope you will stay tuned and come back around and see what we find out. Can I answer questions for you? Yeah.
You mentioned the name Baldwin twice,
Mhm.
Kate Baldwin and Mrs. George Baldwin. Who are they?
So
I'm asking because I live in Baldwin Park, so is that where it got its
Well,
name?
in no surprise to anyone, they're a wealthy Savannah family. And 3 of the men in the family in a row are named George Baldwin. So 3 generations are named George Baldwin. Kate Baldwin is the wife of the first George Baldwin. Her children, there were 4 of them, founded the Kate Baldwin Kindergarten Association, which built the building that we were talking about. And one of the sons, the second George, his wife was one of the women in the Savannah kindergarten movement.
And is that building you're referring to the clearinghouse?
Yes.
Beautiful
It's a
space.
fantastic space.
Beautiful space.
It is, it's really good. And they have a picture of Hortense Orcutt, which I need.
So I recall that when the House decided to do some interactive things and changed the library or one of the rooms upstairs into an interactive space, that there was a tremendous amount of pushback from the Girl Scouts of America. Are you experiencing any of that as you're going forward, or do they seem amenable to programming changes?
So, well, a few things. One, with much love to everyone, it was mostly pushback from the Gordon family, not the Girl Scouts. And it is a historic space that we are currently using as an interactive space. It was a change that was made in 2015. 2015. It's not a choice we necessarily make right now. So to answer your question, no, we don't receive any pushback about it, and girls really like it. To answer the question you didn't ask, will it stay that way? We'll see.
And for your current thinking about focusing on the progressive era and women's history, if Girl Scouts all set, good with that?
Yeah. So we will always have programming here for girls. You know, the house, as I was saying earlier, the shift from physically what the house was like in 1886 to 1912 is not very significant. The general tours will shift in just that they will expand. So instead of saying Juliet slept in this bed, you know, it's like, well, when Juliet was here, she was hanging out with Nina Payton and this woman, and here's why they are important. So it's not changing the subject, it's expanding it. And of course, programming for girls changes all the time because they come back and we need new and exciting things for them. So we'll always be thinking about new things. But we are trying to bring in some of this progressive era thinking to their programs. So for example, one of our programs right now is called Picture This. And the girls, it's our art program. And so girls get to create art, but the educational component of it is learning about women who were illustrators during the progressive era. So they get to learn a piece of that history and then do the art project that they would have done anyway, but pulling in that women's history too.
Great.
You're here first.
Yeah, okay. I thought I remembered reading somewhere where Nina Pape and Juliet Gordon-Low were cousins. Is
Yes,
that-
they're cousins.
Okay.
Yep.
The future of Girl Scouts, what is the number of Girl Scouts today?
You know the wonderful thing about my job? My literal job is to store, organize, and share Girl Scout history. So I don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
In the future, I can tell you how many girls there are. I think there are 2 million, but I think I can look. But
We're all looking at it. We've got about 2 million current, 60 million alone.
there you go.
When I was young, everybody was a Girl Scout. And I think that from just seeing what my granddaughters who are, you know, in their teens and 20s, Girl Scouts was not like the thing everybody had to do.
It's interesting, right? I was a Girl Scout, obviously. And when I was a kid, I'm from a small town. And so you could be a Girl Scout, you could go to the church youth group, you could play softball, right? Those are your options. My daughter has a lot more options than that. And so I think that's something that to your point about what you're seeing, you know, just, it's different.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the boys, you mentioned Ida Wells as a part of the progressive era that you're looking at. Will you also be telling the story of how and when African Americans were kind of incorporated into that movement? Like you, I
Yes.
grew up in a small town, and Girl Scouts were a really big part of that. Virginia's still south, so that's a small southern town.
Yep. So we definitely want to specifically tell the story. I mean, broadly, of course, we want to talk about it, but specifically we want to tell the story of the Black women in Savannah, Georgia, who are fighting for girls to be able to be a member of troops. One of the things on my mind right now is how we tell a lot of these stories in a house museum, because it's different than, you know, another kind of museum where you just put up an exhibit about whatever it is. It's like, well, you're in a period room, so how do you talk about things that didn't happen in that room? So that's something we're thinking about now, is how and where can we end our tours that we can use to expand that story out beyond Juliet and this circle of women to the broader story. So we do mention it now, but not nearly as much as we would like to once we figure out organizationally how to structure that.
Along with that same question, I love the fact that you're trying to create context for history. 1912, I always thought was a very happening time for women because although this was not Savannah, in Baltimore, Henrietta Soule founded Hadassah, and but also in 1912, right here in Savannah, the Jewish Education Alliance was founded, and it was founded by the Women's Club. So there were a lot of, knowing that all of these different progressive things were happening in society, even if women didn't have rights. And you know that 1920, okay, women got the right to vote, but in Georgia, it was not approved till 1970, so it took an extra 50 years for them to ratify women's rights to vote here. And I think that that having these stories surrounding this story is really very important way of telling this history. So thank you very much for doing that.
Absolutely, and one of the things related to this question is, that we think about is like, we have people for 45 minutes, and I want to tell them everything, and you can't in 45 minutes. So a lot of those, we'll talk about a lot of these things, but a lot of those expanding things are like other organizations in Savannah that are founded around the same time, are opportunities for us to have special programs for local Savannahans to come out and learn more about those things, or to partner with those organizations. Like, why don't we have a weekend about the progressive era where we do tours at all of the sites that are founded around? I'm making stuff up right now. But I think that the opportunities are endless for how we can all partner together to connect history. Even really simple things like putting a suggested itinerary on our website that says, interested in this period of history, here are all the other places you can visit while you're in town. So.
And I was gonna ask, is your website the place to go to get information of what's coming up?
I'm so glad you asked.
Okay, I was
So, you can find out some things on our website. Our social media has a lot more of our up-to-date what's happening right now. But our museum member group is called Circle of Friends. And Circle of Friends for a long time has been a vehicle for you to give us money, which we really appreciate. But we would like it to have a lot more benefit for the folks who give us money. And so we're relaunching Circle of Friends in January with all new benefits, including a monthly newsletter just to share really interesting findings from our research, but also to say, and here are all things coming up. And Circle of Friends members will have some opportunities that other folks don't, including getting to meet some of the speakers and authors and people we bring to town in a more intimate setting than like a larger lecture. So anybody can follow our social media, of course, and we hope you do and come to all our events. But also in January, think about joining Circle of Friends to experience some of those other things as well.
And we can learn more about that on your Facebook page?
Absolutely, Facebook, Instagram, and we will put things up in January about Circle of Friends. You can give your email address to one of these fine folks if you want, and we will make absolutely sure that you get a message in January.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that Nellie and Juliet were corresponding a lot during this time period, the 1912. So who lived in this house at that time, and where did Juliet live?
So Juliet's parents, Nellie and also Willie, because you just can't have too many, lived in this house. Juliet made her primary residence in the UK. She owned the Andrew Lowe house, but she primarily lived in the UK.
So it was just her parents that lived here?
Her parents lived here, and a ever-rotating cast of, siblings or nieces and nephews and things, but it was her parents' house. When she was born, it was her grandparents' house.
And always stayed in the family?
It stayed in the family. That's a complicated story. So the original person who built the house is related to them, but it's not the direct line of ancestry, so it's like an uncle. And then the Gordons get the house, live in it for multiple generations. It's apartments for a hot minute, and the Girl Scouts gets it.
Do you work with the First National Headquarters and their museum to kind of streamline the story so you're really telling the same story? Or do you really take different aspects of the story to tell?
So, First Headquarters is owned by Girl Scouts of Historic Georgia. Girl Scouts of Historic Georgia? The Juliet Gordon Birthplace is owned by Girl Scouts of USA, so the national organization. There are 111 Girl Scout councils. It's a federated model if you're not familiar with our whole setup, because why would you be? So we absolutely work with them and partner with them on events and things. Sometimes we do things where, you know, girls go there and do something, they come here and do something, and all that kind of stuff. But we don't coordinate our interpretation. What else? You want to eat lunch and stuff? All right, thank y'all so much. It was so fun.